In 1961, an ordinary drive through New Hampshire turned into a cosmic nightmare for Betty and Barney Hill. They claimed they were abducted by extraterrestrials, probed, examined, and left with fragmented memories. Their story, told under hypnosis, ignited a cultural firestorm and became the blueprint for alien abduction lore forever. But how much did Cold War anxiety, sci-fi media, and earlier UFO sightings shape what they believed or remembered? In this Almost Certainly Not companion series, we examine each episode's origins, production process, behind the scenes, personal thoughts, and most likely go off on some tangents in spite of our best efforts. In this episode, we examine the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. I'm Layla Lawrence.
And I'm Dan Lauer.
And this is Possibly Not.
So Dan.
I'm not going to start with So Dan.
So Dan.
Because So Layla. Oh, okay. So this one's a little bit different than our usual episodes because I came up with this one, the topic for this video. Obviously didn't invent it. Everyone, well, most certainly lots of people know about Betty and Barney Hill's abduction, but this was the first story that I pitched to you, Dan, right? For this series,
Yes.
for Almost Certainly Not?
Well, it's the first one that you pitched that we did. I don't know if it was the first one you pitched.
Because just in case people aren't familiar, or if you haven't listened to the other episodes, which you should, but a lot of these episodes come from topics and articles that Dan has written about on his Substack. So that's kind of how we pull the episodes and structure them. And this one was something that was not on your Substack. This was something that I had just kind of heard about. And I have been interested in kind of like the alien aspect for most of my life. I love reading about sci-fi and things like that. I actually heard about Betty and Barney Hill for the first time on a podcast called Hi Strange. It's with Payne Lindsay. It's a really good podcast. Not that I want to sort of like push anybody else's stuff, but it's okay. You can go listen to that. It is a really good podcast. But I had heard about Betty and Barney Hill on that podcast, and that was the first time I had ever heard of them, and I was just immediately intrigued by their story.
Yeah.
So I brought it up to you, Dan, and funny enough, you are also super familiar with this story. So do you want to say why Betty and Barney Hill are so close to you as well?
Well, yes. And I think what's interesting is this sort of like one of the things that I wanted to keep consistent for ACN is that to try to avoid topics that were incredibly well known or very well covered, of which I think this is definitely one. You throw a rock and hit a podcast that covers Betty and Barney Hill. But I think that they tend to focus on. So when you pitched it, I was sort of like, and you pitched a couple of other things where I was like, oh, that's been done to death. And this one has as well, but I think that they typically tend to focus on the alien abduction angle. And I just so happen to have read The Interrupted Journey, which is the book, the authorized sort of account that Betty and Barney Hill participated in interviews for, a book from the 70s about this. And I read the book and actually probably about 10 years ago started writing a screenplay called The Abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, where my idea was to focus more on the interracial couple of it all, how much they had to lose. And then sort of as an experiment, I was trying to write it to delay the reveal that they were claiming to be abducted by UFOs or by aliens for as long as possible, and make it seem like a kidnapping story instead and keep it really vague, which did not work, which is why I never finished that screenplay. But I had done a lot of thinking and research about the cultural impact, and the thing that I'm less interested now in the alien abduction aspect of it than uh, um, even with people who tell stories of alien abduction and have a lot to lose by looking foolish. They as a couple, an interracial couple at the time, in 1961, had a lot more to lose than most by looking foolish. So that their motivation became really fascinating to me. And I don't think, at least I don't know about the podcast you listen to, but the places I've seen the story featured are much more interested in the alien abduction question than the motivational aspects of it, the cultural impact, the influences. Um, are they lying? Why are they lying? If
Mm-hmm.
they're lying, do they know that they're lying? So I thought that there was enough meat on the bone for me to approach this in a different way than is typically
Mm-hmm.
presented.
Yeah. So that's the same thing as I've seen. Is most of what I've seen is sort of like discussing the actual abduction. I honestly hadn't thought too much about all of the outside stuff, and I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't know that they were an interracial couple
Well,
until
I
you
don't
you said
know.
something about it.
Yeah, and that's what's most interesting to me is the context, and I think that they don't. The way that this is typically presented is as one of a series of cases, like the Travis Walton case of UFO abductions, as opposed to like what makes this interesting to me is almost, and this is going to sound bizarre, and perhaps even unbelievable, but the actual like were they abducted by aliens question is maybe the least interesting to me in this one. I'm more interested in the fixated on the surrounding context than that question, which is, I think, the one that people seek to answer when
Mm-hmm.
they're approaching this. And I know what I think. I know what I think already, so I don't spend any time wondering about that part of it.
So
So
what do you think then? What do you think about it? Because I think you and I have sort of differing opinions about this one.
they were not abducted by aliens.
That's it. Point blank period.
They weren't abducted by aliens. Now, the thing that gets interesting about that is that's what I said. That's what I believe because of things that we'll get into. I mean, just on balance of probability, that is the most likely answer to that single question. But as an interracial couple engaged in an interracial married couple in 1961, engaged in the civil rights movement. Barney was a member of the NAACP. They were both professionals. They had a lot to lose by making up the story and putting it out there. So the motivation of why, how the story originated, what what actually occurred and what the motivation for it was, um, operating under the assumption and playing sort of the opposite of devil's advocate, coming at it from this definitely didn't happen, but why did they then say it did? And they had so much to lose by looking foolish. They didn't profit all that much. Um, so that's the why of it. But I do not believe that they were abducted by extraterrestrials.
I I guess I don't know. I'm sort of wishy-washy on this one. I find that I just think it's insane that they made up this whole story. Like it's not on any basis of fact or anything like that. I suppose is where my kind of disbelief comes in. Because I do believe that we're not alone in the universe. I mean, is that something that you believe as well?
Yes. Yes, and I actually wanted to mention Well, there's a couple of things, a couple of like scientific ideas or sort of theories that I wanted to mention, and um, just to back up, like answering yes to that question. I mean, the universe is so vast, right?
Yeah,
Perhaps
like we
even
can't even comprehend it. Like our
no.
tiny human brains cannot comprehend how vast the universe is.
So, uh, yeah, and just to back that up, so there's this is widely known and well known. I don't know if you were familiar with it, but there's something called the Drake equation, which was created by Dr. Frank Drake in
I
1961.
am. I saw that. I saw it in our notes when you posted about it. I have actually never heard of that before.
Okay, so he it's there's a lot of variables that he's accounting for that are unknowns. Especially in 1961, they were unknowns. But it's sort of it was intended to answer the question, where is everybody, and how likely is it for anyone to be out there? Because the question becomes, how frequent is life in the universe? And we can talk about single-celled organisms all the way up to intelligent beings and start anywhere on that scale. How rare are amoebas in the universe? How many planets have single-celled organisms on them? How many planets have lizards, or something that would remind us of lizards? How many planets that can sustain life have a version of life that would be indistinguishable from a plant to us, even though it's an animal? All of these questions. But basically, because the universe is so vast, almost as a thought experiment, he assembled what is known today as the Drake equation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he actually developed it as a way to um, guide the general discussion at the first meeting for SETI, which is a search for extraterrestrial intelligence. It's an organization that actually has a scientific approach to trying to find
Oh, what
signs
a cool
of
job to have.
extraterrestrial. Well, it doesn't. It's like volunteers. It doesn't pay anything.
Ugh,
But
never mind. Garbage.
when when the organization was developed, he wanted to have a way to guide the discussion about what are the likelihoods and what are the ways to find signs of
Mm-hmm.
intelligent life, and how likely is it even to exist. So the equation that he assembled wasn't meant to give a precise answer, but rather as a way to frame the conversation using what he considered to be, and most people would consider to be, logical, measurable terms. And it estimates how many civilizations might exist in our galaxy, using a series of variables such as how many stars are there? How long do stars exist for? How many stars have planets orbiting them in our galaxy? How many of those planets are in the Goldilocks zone where there can be liquid water to sustain life? So he
Mm-hmm.
and a series of other variables that he plugged in just for our galaxy. And his equation suggests that billions of planets could host life, based on those variables, but perhaps only thousands could develop an intelligent civilization. Um, and a So then the question becomes, where is everybody? Which is sort of referred to as the
Yeah.
Fermi paradox. If there is intelligent life and we're listening, why don't we
Yeah.
hear anything? A prevailing theory. So if we take the Drake equation at face value and assume that his variables are correct, that means just in our galaxy alone, there should be thousands of planets that have or have had or will have intelligent civilizations on the order of human beings, or slightly, maybe uh, not as a society. Maybe they're a little bit behind us. Maybe they're hundreds of millions of years ahead of us, or somewhere in
Yeah.
between. There's a sort of an idea tacked on to the end of this, which is something that we may even be in the midst of, which is a prevailing theory about what's kind of known as the Great Silence, is that a sufficiently advanced species, one that may at some point achieve the technology for interstellar travel within a lifetime, will ultimately self-destruct because of the industry that they need to develop in order to get to that point. It could be climate collapse, nuclear war, artificial intelligence, but that there may be a bottleneck in the development of a intelligence or a society such as that before achieving interstellar travel, no matter how close they are to it, it drastically reduces the odds of contact. So that's sort of that's the idea that life, as even intelligent life, just in our galaxy, in the universe, and extending up to the universe, it borders on probable. It's more likely than not, given how the compounds and the elements that were necessary to create life on Earth are very abundant in the universe. We're carbon-based life forms. Right next to us in the periodic table is silicon. So they also believe, other people who hypothesize, biologists and astrophysicists, assume that, or I think may have even proven that there may be silicon-based life forms.
There are boob implant aliens out there?
Wow.
Listen, you've got this highly intelligent diatribe going on here, so I have to throw in the occasional, like...
They're big titty aliens, and I don't know what planet that is, but I want to go there.
It was, honestly, that was the first thing I thought of when you said that, and that says a lot about the age of my humor.
This is a lot about you as a person.
It really does. It really does. Oh man. Okay, so back to it.
Well, just as an aside, what do you think this planet would be called? What do we name this big titty alien planet?
Oh my god. I can't get it together.
Titania. You're a fucking child. You know that? You're a child.
Oh my god, get it together, Layla. Okay. Whew.
The Titanians.
I think that's perfect. I love it. Yeah. Let's print it. Let's go. Oh god. Please don't cut that out.
Oh. I'm gonna buy you a t-shirt just for you that says "That's staying in" on it.
Oh my god. If you are listening to this episode and that was also the first thing that you thought of, please leave a comment. I know we don't ask people to leave comments all the time.
Well, I don't
but please leave a comment if that was also the first thing you thought of, because I need to know I'm not alone.
Well, it's interesting. Number one, I want to join SETI to find this big titty species.
Titania?
Titania and the Titanians, and I want to see if I can go there and become. Maybe they're like less
the ruler,
less technologically advanced than they are. So like I might just take my iPhone out and be their god. So that'd be pretty cool. It would look like magic. But then I also think it's interesting because I don't know a lot about it, but it's my understanding that isn't saline used a lot more than silicon these days? Isn't silicon
probably. I don't know. Yeah. I'm not up to date on the compounds used. Oh my gosh, probably saline is. I don't know. I just know that I had one friend who got hers done, and she called them gummy bear boobs. Those are the only ones I've ever had anything. She actually forced me to feel them.
Oh, what a burden.
When she got them done, and I was like, "Oh, not forced." She put a gun to my head, but she was just immediately. We were in a show together, and she literally immediately whipped off her top and was like, "Feel them, feel them." She was so proud of them, but she called them gummy bear boobs, so I'm not sure what compound that was either. Anyway, we've gone off on a tangent.
No, knowing you the way I do, I don't think there was any forcing at all. She took her tits out and said, "Feel them," and you dove at her.
You're like, yeah, all right.
I just think it's funny that of the two of us, you were the first one to bring up tits. That's not usually how it goes.
It's not. But you're having a highly intelligent conversation here, and then that was just the first thing I thought of when you said silicone base. I also didn't know that. I'm not a big periodic table person, so I didn't know that.
It just kind of like
silicone
case in
was
point
the next to us
from the possibly not we did for the manipulation episode. Like case in point about the heterosexual male brain. Now you've introduced tits into the. I can't. I forget.
Can't focus on anything else.
I forget what I was talking about. All I can think about is Titania. How do I get there? I need to quit my job and start working for SETI, and I need to become the god of Titania. I don't know how to recover. I don't know how to get back into this.
Where do we go from here?
I don't know. I just want to spend some time.
I don't even remember what we were talking about.
This big titty.
The silicone
planet.
life forms, I guess, is what we were talking about. Is that silicone was on the periodic table next to us, but now I don't know how we could talk about it without laughing. Oh God! All right.
What do you think they wear?
I'm crying. I need you to know I'm probably crying.
Nothing. Probably nothing at all. I bet. I mean, that seems. It's probably hot there. It's probably sweaty.
Oh my God.
Oh.
Have fun cutting this one, Woody, because
this is all staying in. Now I'm just hanging out. I'm in my head and I'm hanging on Titania, and I'm wondering if I'll ever get bored here, and I just don't think so. You're a fucking child. You know that?
Get it together.
You're a child.
I am. I know I am. I do have the I mean, I have the humor of an 11-year-old boy. I know I have.
I do like.
That's just my
okay,
life.
so like now, but to punish you, I'm going to. It's your job to get us to the next bullet point. So have fun with that, because I'm staring.
Well, we're not even done with this bullet point though. We haven't finished our thought.
We are. I went through it.
Okay.
I was titting about tits, and then you interrupted with tits, and then I was titting about tit.
Mm-hmm.
No, what
so
I meant.
Speaking of boobs, the stakes for Betty and Barney must have been really high in the 60s.
Now the only thing I want to know about Betty is what her cup size was. She have some heavy hangers, or what are we talking about?
Oh no, we've got off the rails.
Some large naturals.
Oh my God. This is the off on some tangents. This isn't even our best efforts. It's just like, where has it gone? Oh my God. Oh.
I'm not
okay,
cutting.
I do actually, to be fair, I do have something to add to what you were saying previously prior to the silicone absolute tangent we went on.
And just so you know,
I can't remember.
Hold
Sorry?
on, shush. I'm not cutting you any breaks. Every syllable of that is staying in this episode because it's your fault. So
I would expect no less. People aren't listening anymore at that point then. People are just like, no, I'm done listening. But I will say, going back to your previous point, previous to previous, pre-tits, PT, I will say, I heard, and I cannot remember where I heard it, so I can't even cite it properly, but the thing that I heard that has kind of like stuck with me about other life forms in the galaxy is, I don't know why, but it was just assumed that they would be far further ahead than us, intelligence-wise, which is not difficult now that you've heard where my humor lies. But just intelligent life, they would be like light years ahead of us. And so they would kind of view us. Well, this is not kind of part of this, but they would sort of view us as like a much lesser species. So as I heard it in this, wherever I heard it, this quote, they said, well, do you stop and really like examine ants as you walk past them? Do you want to visit the ant colonies as you're passing by them? No, because they're so far beneath you, you don't worry about them.
Scientists
and so
do.
that's kind of how it was. Scientists do, yeah. But that's kind of how it was presented in this podcast or whatever it was that I was listening to about this. And that kind of really stuck with, that sort of made sense to me, where I was just like, oh, maybe that's why, you know, if there is other life in the galaxy, in the universe, they're just kind of like, oh, humans? Pfft, they're way behind us. We're not gonna bother with them. Like maybe every once in a while they have like a flyover just to make sure we haven't like self-destructed or something like that. But
Well, why would they even care if that's the? I mean, if you're talking about
well, if you're saying like scientists, you know how scientists sort of examine ants, you know, maybe every once in a while they sort of do like a flyover and they're like, oh look, more war, haha, idiots, and then they just like leave.
Well, yeah, so if they're capable of I mean, the other thing, I mean, you mentioned ants, which is interesting, and there's an analogy that I like about the distances, like a way to compress the idea of the amount of distance between, even if there are thousands of intelligent civilizations in our own galaxy, in the Milky Way.
Mm-hmm.
The vastness of the galaxy is something that our ape brains are not capable of comprehending. So think of it this way. Even if we're scanning the skies for radio signals, which is probably the most likely way that we would interact with an alien civilization, is to capture a radio signal that's being broadcast from them, or they capture one to us. Then you also have to think about the amount of time involved and how slowly, relatively speaking, you know, because radio signals travel slower than light, which is the fastest thing in the universe. So accounting for all of that, but it's sort of like, I've heard it described as, to boil it down, to stumble upon each other, even if we're looking. It's sort of like an ant, like two ants, picture two ants. One starts on the what are the white cliffs in Britain? Dover?
Dover, yeah, Cliffs of Dover.
So the cliffs of Dover, one ant who's blind starts walking from the cliffs of Dover, and another ant who's blind begins in France and accidentally gets on a boat, and then they walk in just in a general path, with no plan, and aren't sure that the other exists. The likelihood of us sort of randomly capturing a radio signal is the likelihood of the two of those ants, once they're both on in Britain, is the likelihood of us encountering that's how vast the distances are.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that definitely puts it into perspective.
That's it's a slightly clumsy analogy, but that is how, like two ants who are blind and don't even know the other one exists, wandering all the way across England from different points and running into each other is like almost infinitesimal. It's almost pointless to discuss. It's so unlikely.
And that also speaks to just like how we just can't comprehend the distance or the magnitude of the galaxy, even, like, not even talking about the universe, like just even the galaxy.
Yeah. So if intelligent life exists, now there are things like the James Webb telescope that we have, that there are things that I don't know whether you want to get into or not, but there are things that we think we can predict about a civilization more advanced than us that might leave a visible trace on their solar system, like some sort of a structure that harnesses the energy of their local star. That even so, if we can look with enough clarity and far enough, we may see something that they've left behind, something structural, even if we don't interact. The thing is that if that solar system is 10 light years away, or 100 light years away, if it's 10 light years away, you're looking 10 years into the past. But some stars in our own galaxy are 1 billion light years away, which means whatever we're seeing happened it took 1 billion years for that light.
So difficult to wrap your head around that. Well, maybe not yours, but it's so difficult for me to wrap my head around that. Just the way the time just means
It's not
nothing.
difficult for me to wrap my head around it anymore, but it's not intuitive. You can't guess that. So you have to train your brain to think that way. So whenever Even when you see looking at the sun, you're looking at the sun 8 minutes ago because it takes 8 minutes for the light to get from the sun to the earth. That's so, I mean, think about how hot and bright the sun is, and it's still
Mm-hmm.
not instantaneous. It takes eight
Yeah.
minutes from the photons leaving the surface of the
God, it's
sun to make it to
crazy.
Earth. Yeah. And it's going at light speed. So extend that to the other end of the Milky Way galaxy and
Yeah.
beyond the galaxy. And as far, I mean, when we're looking back to what we think is the beginning of the universe, we're looking at some the light that occurred in those first galaxies in the universe that we're seeing, or the stars that go supernova. We're looking at things that happened 11 billion years ago
God, it's crazy.
by the time we see
I
it.
mean, I know that just from like watching different documentaries and learning about space and all, but it's not something that is just like in the forefront of my brain. So you saying it has just kind of reminded me of it, and I'm like, oh my God, that's insane. Like, it's not a new revelation to me because it's something that I have heard, but when you really stop and think about it, like, it is just absolutely mad.
So that, and I say that to say this, which is that there's so many unknowns in
Mm-hmm.
that you have to make leaps in logic to make assumptions about a civilization that has achieved interstellar travel. How long have they existed? Are they eternal? Because that's not an impossibility. Do they eventually make it to a point where they and AI are one and the same? Their consciousness as a civilization becomes eternal because it's not biological anymore.
Yeah.
And
So,
do they scan the universe? And all of those things to happen, and think of us as like a not particularly interesting, kind of quiet backwater planet on the far edge of a not particularly interesting galaxy, in a not particularly interesting galaxy cluster, and a not particularly interesting, like, local galactic cluster on the edge of some part of the maybe uncharted universe. Then you have to make suppositions and assumptions about alien visitation. What are they doing here and why? And then you get into questions that cannot be answered. But just that's the unlikelihood of somebody finding us or us finding them.
so do you think, I mean, this is something that, for all intents and purposes, was just like out of the blue for Betty and Barney to come forward with. And I mean, it was in the 60s. They were an interracial couple, so they were already facing like so much. And then to come out with something like this as well. I mean, do you have any theories about why they would want, I don't know, just why they would make this up? Or
I mean,
because
you
I
would
feel
have
like
to.
it would be treated differently today, just because obviously, like, the 60s, an interracial couple was like mind blowing kind of thing. And now it's just, you know, commonplace. It's no big deal. But I don't know. It's just so crazy to me that they would risk all of that just to come up with this outlandish story.
But I mean, on balance, what is more likely, that they made it up or that they were abducted by aliens? All things being
Now,
equal, given what we just
all
talked
things being
about.
equal, I mean, I'm certain that they, I mean, now that we've talked about it, and I mean, I'm sure that they made it up. But like, what did they know they were making it up? Did they? Why would you want more of a spotlight on you when
Well,
you're already in kind of a vulnerable position?
that's the
Why
reason
would you
that
do that?
that's the reason I agreed to do the pitch, because that's what we get into, right? Because we talk about
Yeah.
the climate of the time, the Cold War, there the pieces of media that predate their encounter, and the revelation, at least by some, that
Yeah.
Betty, but prior to this, Betty had a real fascination with alien abduction.
Well, and you were
Um,
even saying the Drake equation was created in 1961 as well. So that's also happening around this time.
Yeah, I mean, SETI wasn't well known, so I would be surprised if she was aware of that. But I mean, but this was a cultural this had already become something cultural, and we include
Mm-hmm.
clips of things like The Day the Earth Stood Still and some episodes of The Twilight Zone that deal with ideas like this. And there's a couple of different things at play. The Cold War paranoia, where the Russian as the other, and supposing that, because you can land on either side of the coin. It depends on the kind of media that you're making. Something like The War of the Worlds, where they're
Mm-hmm.
a completely hostile race that come to wipe out humanity, and something like The Day the Earth Stood Still, where they're coming to help, or even something more recent like Arrival, which is a movie that I really love because it was
Oh,
an
that
Amy
movie made
Adams
me
film.
cry.
Yeah, which is
I
a way
sobbed.
of a really, probably the most interesting way I've ever seen both extraterrestrials depicted, which is in a form that's like, it's not just basically a human with pointy
Yeah.
ears or
Yeah.
gills. It's a thing that we can't even like can barely recognize as a life form, and also the way that they have developed the way that they perceive time is so vastly different that it makes communication almost impossible. And I would highly recommend both a book and the original the 71 Russian film Solaris, when it comes to communication with an alien life form, because that book deals with um, a group of scientists who find a planet that's covered by an ocean, and the ocean is an intelligent life form, and the entire
Huh.
ocean is one single life form, and they spend years trying to figure out a way to communicate with it and fail. And ultimately the question becomes, but it's like, it's a very powerful life form, so much so that it can influence their thoughts and sort of make
Wow.
things appear to them that aren't real, and they don't know if it's hostile or not, or even if it has the ability to understand hostility or understand motivation or understand communication as
Mm-hmm.
such. And it's ultimately becomes, they decide ultimately that it's futile, that there is no possibility of communication between us and this thing. Something even more recent, there's a movie called Annihilation with Natalie Portman, which um, deals with a extraterrestrial arrival on planet Earth that they investigate, which begins to change the nature of the things in its sphere of influence. And it doesn't. It's another interesting conception of alien, because you think they're either going to be hostile or they're going to be uh, beneficent or magnanimous. Like, here, they're either going to
Mm-hmm.
be here to destroy us or here to help us. And in the movie Annihilation, it's just here. It's almost like
It's
it's
just
here because
neutral.
it's what it does.
Yeah.
Almost like a shark. It's a very intelligent and it's very high tech, but it, like, answering like, why does a shark eat a seal? Because that's what a shark does.
Yeah.
In the movie Annihilation, why does this extraterrestrial life form, whatever it is, do what it does? Because that's what it does, and seeking motivation in the way that we think of it is almost ultimately at the end of the movie. Natalie Portman returns, or at least we think she does. It might not be her, but that's a whole other part. But
Spoiler alert.
the scientists who sent her out and are conducting, they're interviewing her because she actually encounters this thing, and they say, "What was it?" And she says, "I don't know." And what did it do? And she says, "I don't know." And what did it want? And she says, "I don't know if it wanted anything." But even though she encountered it, just the questions of like, what was it? Her
Yeah.
brain is not, I don't know. Um,
Well, and humans try to explain things as they correlate to humans, really. Like, I feel like our brains are just not advanced enough to grasp something like that.
no, our reach exceeds our grasp, even
Yeah.
with our imagination. So, anyway, getting back to the point, there's a couple of interesting questions here, or that are kind of unanswerable. But the reason that I like this story more, because if let's just, for the sake of argument, start at the point that they were not abducted by aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody but the two of them were there. I will say, to be fair, because I don't want to be like, I can't. I don't like to be tasked with this, and it's not really the way that investigation works. You can't prove a negative.
Yeah.
I can't prove that it didn't happen, but it's also not on me. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So it is on them and the people who believe them to prove that it happened. Otherwise, we're all just sort of guessing. So I
Well,
am
and
not
we've all. Sorry.
I'm not going to say I know it didn't happen. I wasn't there. I'm just looking at the balance of probability. It's more likely than not that they made it up, or Betty made it up, or they was it a plan? What did something weird actually happen? Did they get into a car accident and get concussed? And all of these unknowns, because something happened and it infected the both of them enough that they decided to go public with it. To your point, despite understanding that it was going to jeopardize an already fragile position in society at that time. So the motivation was strong to share this, but people believe like they have false memories that become part of their own biographical history. And once it's incorporated that deeply, you don't, it's not lying to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you brought it up, that's the Mandela effect,
Well, it's
where
an
it's
aspect
just,
of it where, I mean, you
yeah,
could see this,
you
that there
start
are,
to believe your own stories.
yeah, and there are a couple different examples of this. But for anybody who is not familiar with the Mandela effect, it's the a term used to describe a phenomenon. The most famous of which is it's describing the phenomenon of a widespread false memory,
Mm-hmm.
and it's named after the idea that and I'm not sure when this was um, first like identified, but I don't have this, although I would have been very young, but there's a huge number of people who have a vivid memory of Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s, up to and including news coverage of his funeral, mourning crowds, the details of his death, despite the fact that he died in 2013 after being released from prison and serving as South
Mm-hmm.
Africa's president for many years. Um,
But people
so
really distinctly remember.
they have a distinct memory of not only a vague, like, oh, I think he died in the 1980s, but like, no, I watched it on the news. I watched the,
Yeah.
like, almost like Princess Diana. Like, I watched the
Yeah.
coverage of the mourning and the funeral and everything.
Well, this is
Um,
also, it's on a much more basic level. It's where I've seen people post like logos of companies on the internet, and they're just kind of like, which one is the right logo? And it's like our brains have kind of, and it's like a collective as well. It's not just like one here or there. It's like a collective agreement that no, this is the one that's right. And it's usually not. It's usually our brains have just like added something to it, and it's not actually the correct logo.
when I have a more close to home example for you, going all the way back to the first episode of Possibly Not, you told me a kind of a spooky story about your husband finding a class ring in a car, his dad's
Yes,
class ring.
yeah.
You amended that story later, because I didn't
Mm-hmm.
believe it for a second. I thought it was just a coincidence and meaningless. But you clarified the story with him, and you didn't know how many details you added to make it spookier.
Well,
You
and you
just
want to know, I couldn't, if you put a gun to my head and asked me to recall the actual story, which he genuinely just told me again when
Yeah.
I was discussing the episode with him like a few weeks ago, I wouldn't be able to tell you the actual story. I don't remember. I don't know what that says about me and my capacity for listening to my husband, but like I don't
It says
I couldn't
more
tell you
about,
the actual story.
but it says more about our natural inclination to be understood. And I think in
Yeah.
that moment, we were discussing and disagreeing about our positions on whether or not ghosts exist. That is not a you thing, that's a human thing. And you, to be understood and perhaps even to be believed, I don't think that you were lying. You told me that story
That's what I
as
thought was true.
it was occurring to you in the moment. And the thing about
Yeah.
accessing memory is we're not accessing the event or even the original or the time that we were exposed to whatever it is that we're talking about. The way our memory works is we're accessing the last time we remembered it.
Yeah.
And if something happens in between, something can be inserted. And it's not volitional. You weren't lying. You were misremembering. But in that moment, that was the truth to you. That's what had
Well,
happened.
that's also why witness testimony is so unreliable. I mean, it comes down to all of this: is you remember what you think you saw, but it's not necessarily the truth.
And there are people who, going back to things like the satanic panic in the 80s, there are people who to this day maintain that they were ritualistically, like, sexually abused by these satanic cults that like their stories don't they weren't even in the state at the time where they think it happened. But in their minds it happened, and it's because of the way that it was introduced. So let's start with something like your misunderstanding. So the skeleton of the story: your husband, a junkyard, and a class ring that belonged to his dad. Okay.
Yeah.
So those are the things that they have in common. And whether you knew
And
it or not,
those points by themselves are all true.
are all true. But the framework that you built around that for the sake of the conversation made it lean in a direction that was more likely than not to kind of combat my argument that it was just a coincidence, or how extraordinary a coincidence must be. You weren't lying. Now, so that's a small example, and it's not particularly intense, but take that as a baseline and extend it out to a thing that becomes important to you, and how it grows and changes shape. And over the course of many, many years, you won't know anymore that thing that you believe so fervently to be true isn't. And unless it's thoroughly documented, then it's kind of your word against everybody else's. So I don't know. Did they?
I also think the more you talk about it, because usually when people talk about things, small details will change every time they talk about things as well. And I would imagine,
particularly if they get a good reaction.
yeah, and I would imagine that Betty and
story,
Barney were talking about this, several times a day.
Yeah. So the question then becomes, if we're at the starting point still that this didn't actually happen, was it like a kernel of something that began to grow, and over the course of years they convinced each other, like Betty would add a little bit, Barney would add a little bit, Betty would add a little bit, Barney would, and it festers and grows, and they begin to tell each other the story, and they're a married couple and rely on each other for their sense of history and biography, and memory, and keep reinfecting each other until eventually it's the truth. They're not lying anymore. It's what happened.
Well, and I
you
mean, they
tell
were
it
in this.
over
Sorry.
and over and over. Well, the more times you tell the story, like, let's say that you had never talked to your husband to get clarification on that.
Yeah.
That would be the story as you understand it to this day. And the next time you told it to me, if it got the reaction that you were after, the parts that people react, we're all performers to a certain extent. We want to be heard, and we want to be understood, and we want a reaction. We want an audience sometimes. So you might not know that you're doing it, but you that thing that got a good reaction, I had that on about a 5.5. I'm going to go ahead and turn that up to a 9. People will like it even more.
Yeah.
I don't think it's nefarious. But so I don't know. It's kind of an unanswerable question. If we're assuming this did not occur, were they driving back home from their trip and thought, it would be fun is if we just made up? And, I've been watching a lot of.
I mean, that's quite nefarious, though, isn't it?
It is, but I mean, people do that. People hoax.
They do. I think my thought is that on long drives, people zone out all the time. And it is just that, like, zoning. I mean, I wonder perhaps about, like, lucid dreaming, because so often people have, when you lucid dream, you really wake up and you think, hold on a minute, where am I? Was that true? Like, it really feels real.
Well, and there's that, and there's also, like, going back to the Mandela effect, that started somewhere. Because, like, that definitely, he did not die in the 1980s. That's a fact. It's not arguable. I mean, there are people who will try to say that, like, they'll get into quantum physics and parallel universes and be like, well, maybe in a universe that sits beside ours, he did die in 1980, and like that thing. Okay, fine, great. Maybe. I mean, that's almost. I mean, if you prove it, that's amazing. What an amazing thing to have incorporated into our understanding of the natural world. But right now, that's gibberish. But so many people remember it that way. Where did it begin? Why do they remember it? Why are they so fervent about it? Why are they so shocked when they find out that that's not true? Why do they reject the fact that it's not true? Their brains rebel against that idea because the memory is so vivid. It's there. They can picture themselves watching the news coverage. So,
well, also people don't like to doubt their own brains either, because it makes you not trust yourself. So when someone brings that forward and is like, no, that didn't happen, here is the evidence as to why that didn't happen, the person they're telling that to is going to try their damnedest to cling to it, because it's like, hold on, wait, if I can't trust my own brain, who can I trust, kind of thing.
And we're not good at, like I said, we're not good at biographical memory. Our memories operate on how it's kind of an emotional memory more than biographical, where it's not a straight recording of the events. There's emotion involved in it. How did it make us feel? And the retelling is, I mean, they've done studies about this. Well, they'll film something that occurred and 50 people watch something happen live, film it, then interview each person it's like a series of events in order, and then interview all 50 people who watched the thing occur and say, just tell me in order what things happened, how long they lasted for, what order they occurred in. And you'll get, like, they'll all have things in common, kind of like your junkyard story, but they'll be out of order. Things that didn't happen will be inserted. Things that did happen will be omitted. Things that took a short period of time will be long. And they don't know that they're doing it. It's just that that's the way that the mind operates. How much were you paying attention at any given moment?
Yeah.
Did your mind wander? Also, there's pressure now. You don't want to feel like an idiot, so you want to give some answer.
Yeah.
So memory, and some people... I mean, and there's also this interesting thing that, there's a cultural thing that because someone is a doctor, has a medical degree or a medical doctorate, they're more trustworthy than somebody who doesn't. And also, if someone is a prostitute, she must have bad eyesight, because if she says that she saw something happen as a witness to a crime, well, she's a prostitute, so how trustworthy could it be? And there are doctors who have been serial killers, and there are prostitutes who were just down on their luck and probably very intelligent people and weren't that likely to lie. So
that's just the conception.
Yeah, there's all these societal sort of norms that we assign and there are people in positions of authority like doctors, and you kind of need to be able to have some trust in them. And people, homeless people just don't get, I mean, they wouldn't have the same, wouldn't be relied on the same.
Off their face, aren't they?
Well, they wouldn't be relied on in the same way to be or recount. But I mean, honestly, like somebody who witnesses a crime, a homeless person, a doctor, a lawyer, or a prostitute, I mean, if it's an intense situation and they would probably all four of them would tell a slightly different story having witnessed the same event. But then there are also people that people want attention. Sometimes people just want attention and they make stuff up.
Yeah.
And sometimes people don't, there's no distinction to them between good attention and bad attention. Sometimes people are lonely. They feel alone in the world. And even, I think you probably see this online a lot. People would rather be mocked than ignored.
Well, that's kind of my question is, do you think that because they were facing such animosity or difficulty as an interracial couple, perhaps they came up with this to kind of elevate their status and be like, people will take us seriously
That's
if we come
possible.
out with this, because it wasn't, I mean, now in today's society, if someone comes forward and says they've been probed by aliens, it ends up splashed about on the National Enquirer. Like, it's not something that anybody really takes seriously. But in the 60s, it was something that, because of the media and the cultural aspect of it, it was something that was taken seriously. Do you think perhaps they were like, oh, well, this is something that we can garner more respect from society because we come forward with this claim?
Well, two things there. One, I lost myself in my point about doctors and prostitutes, but there's a little bit of that in here where they were professionals, they were active in civil rights. He was part of the NAACP, so because of their, even though they were interracial, it's not. But looking back in retrospect, there's a certain amount, we like people like you and I, who are on the what I would consider to be the right side of history, want to admire them
Mm-hmm.
for that, for as serious people. And
Yeah.
so it adds more credence, it gives more weight to the story, because they're not just random alcoholics, they're
You
serious
don't want to
professional people.
immediately doubt them.
Right. And it like the doctor in my previous example, they're were serious professional, mature, active members of society who were striving to improve, in the civil rights movement, we're striving to improve the quality of life of so many people, that it's almost sort of anathema to the way that we view civil rights activists in the 60s, to say like, well, they lied about that for attention. That feels a
Yeah.
little gross. But sometimes, I mean, people who know their station in life, and people who decide that they're going to make something up to get attention, they know that about themselves and how likely they are to be believed. So I mean, this is another one of those, and something else that I like about the episodes that we do sometimes, where like there is no answer
Yeah,
unless
I
you
was just thinking those exact words as well.
yeah.
I was just thinking, like, there really is no answer. There is no conclusive sort of like, yep, that's what happened. Based upon the evidence, that's what happened.
And I think what's interesting is, like, I think that they were more readily mocked than they would be today. And what's interesting about today is, think about this. When was the last time that you heard a news story about an alien abduction?
Well, that's what, to my point, that's what I was saying, because I feel like anyone who
But
comes forward with something like that, it just goes on one of like the gossip rags kind of thing.
but how often of late have we been seeing, quote unquote, well, not quote unquote, unidentified flying objects featured on the
Mm-hmm.
news?
What was
It-
big? The ones that were just happening in New Jersey or something like that, wasn't it? It was like drones or something that people were talking about just very recently.
well, and like and some of these being released by the military,
Mm-hmm.
even, and they're unidentified like, people make the connection. Unidentified flying object just means a object that is flying that we don't know what it is. It doesn't
It
mean
does.
it has
Yeah, it doesn't
anything
have
to
to be
do.
alien based.
No.
Yeah.
But the military doesn't know what it is, but they don't know what everything is. But we also added, well, it came from the military, or a guy who was he was a colonel, and he's saying
Yeah.
this. Well, okay. Well, just because he's a colonel doesn't mean that he's got a perfect recall or necessarily is willing to tell the truth. Just like the prostitute doesn't have bad eyesight just because she's a prostitute.
Well, I
Um,
also think there's so much distrust in the, I'm speaking specifically about the US. There is so much distrust in the government for the past however many years, and for however long it will last. I think that if someone saw an unidentified flying object in the sky now, I don't think they would jump to, oh, it's an alien, as perhaps previously. I think more than likely they would jump to, this is something sent by the government, or this is something sent by the Chinese government or something like that, like to spy on us. Like the alien thing is not the thing that's jumped to first. Now it's your own government or governments of opposing countries are now spying on you, kind of thing.
Well, and there's precedent for that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
some of the we know for a fact that the CIA and the military, when they were developing things like the U-2 spy plane and the Blackbird, which were planes that didn't, I mean, they were brand new planes. They flew really high, really fast, and they, before satellites were so ubiquitous, they were intended to fly above radar and above anti-aircraft missiles in order to take picture to spy on the Soviets in the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
50s and 60s. The CIA and the military did not want the American population to know, or anyone to know, that these planes existed. They were fine with people thinking it was
That they were
aliens.
aliens, yeah.
They
And in that time
stoked that.
frame, that was so popular as well.
Yeah. So we know that on more than one occasion, they deliberately fed to members of places like SETI and MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network, which is like a group of people that coordinate to investigate these encounters. We know that clandestine operatives of intelligence agencies, when there were sightings of experimental aircraft, would feed them. They would pretend to be members, or they would be undercover and would feed them information that they knew was false, because they were happy to let them think that it was aliens, because
Yeah.
they knew that it wasn't. They knew it was things that they
Rather
wanted to
than to
hide.
know what was
Yeah.
actually happening. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what you tend to see today. And like a really high profile alien abduction case hasn't come along in a while, but there's a lot more sightings of things that are unexplained. Um, so I don't know. I think that there's all of these. There's one thing that people like to cling to, which is that during, because ultimately Betty and Barney did come forward with their story. They were engaged with like the MUFON of the day. They got in touch with people who were studying UFOs at the time, or UFO encounters. They underwent hypnosis, which we all know is notoriously bad for retrieving memories. It's more likely to
Mm-hmm.
implant it. And that's where they didn't have any biographical memories of it. A lot of this was retrieved through hypnosis, which we go through in detail. But one of the things that Betty talked about was being shown a star map and drawing it from the memory that she had in her hypnosis session, and that the aliens told her, this is where we come from. And the star map that she drew, which we show in the episode, bears a striking resemblance to a series of stars called, I think it's called Zeta Reticuli. Um, but I'm not going to go, because we get into it in the episode.
Yeah.
But you have to kind of squint and tilt your head, and if you do, it looks like Zeta Reticuli, or the way that it would have looked at the time. But it's that's kind of a thing that people kind of hang their hat on for this story, is like, that wasn't a well-known thing at the time, and it would have been very difficult in 1961 for someone like Betty Hill to gain access to the layout of that star system and to memorize it and to draw it freehand. Not impossible, but difficult. And people sort of like, that's something that people find to be tangible, as like evidence of like, well, how would she know that? But it's sort of like, not only is it's unlikely but not impossible, but it's also like, it's not a perfect rendering of Zeta
Yeah. I mean,
Reticuli.
a bunch of there are so many stars. Just put a bunch of spots on the paper. You can make it look like anything.
And it was only years and years and years later that a UFO researcher said, hey, wait a minute, that looks a lot like Zeta Reticuli. Nobody knew that at the time. She just
Mm-hmm.
said, this is what I saw on the star map, and they told me this is where they're from. It's interesting too, because Zeta Reticuli is relatively close. My facts are failing here, but there's something about, I think that's a star system where they're called exoplanets. We identify planets that exist, that are orbiting suns, even distant suns, or stars rather, and planets that are in that sort of Goldilocks zone, not too cold, not too hot, because our conception of life at this point is that liquid water needs to exist in order to achieve life. So it can't be frozen or boiling. Liquid water needs to be able to exist. And I think that that's something interesting is Zeta Reticuli is not too far away. It might have some of those traits. And then people kind of draw, like I said, squint and tilt your head, and it sort of looked like Zeta Reticuli. And hey, that's pretty interesting because it's pretty close. And there's a chance
but you couldn't
that
lay it on top of. It wouldn't be an exact match.
No, I mean, it's all, I mean, I don't know, because it gets messy here too. It would be too hard on Betty. Let's say that she did see it. Stars exist in 3-dimensional space. A piece of paper is 2-dimensional.
Very true, yeah.
So you can't really do an exact relationship you can't render. I mean, basically when you render a 3D object on a 2D space, it's basically you're drawing the shadow of a 3-dimensional object and not the object itself. But that's the one major thing that people point to as
they cling to it. Well, you're right. It is the only tangible thing that you can have as like an aha. Like, aha, see, she has this, so it happened.
And it all depends on, it's like everything else, right? All stories like this, or even the story like with your husband and the junkyard. Depends on the way you tell the story. You could tell the story and not lie, but leave out certain parts. And if the bullet points are, nobody knew about Zeta Reticuli, and she drew a map of Zeta Reticuli in the early 60s. How would she have access to it? Isn't that extraordinary? And we think there might be planets there that could have life. And then stop talking. That sounds extraordinary. But if you keep talking and give the rest of the details that aren't as extraneous as they might seem, it becomes less extraordinary all the time.
Which is really what we do here at Possibly Not.
Just piss on your parade.
We just piss all over your parade. Just shit in your Cheerios. You think aliens exist? They don't. You think this person is still alive? She's not.
Well, going all the way back, I think I pontificated and gave you my opinion, but like this was your idea. You recommended this. And I kind of want to rewind the clock back before I went through the Drake equation and the unlikelihood and all of that. And like, do you think that there's a chance that they were abducted by aliens?
No, for all intents and purposes, no. I don't think there was a chance that they were abducted by aliens. I guess my interest in this is more in the psychology of it. But do I think that aliens exist and there are some things that happen, and I've said this before on other episodes, some things that happen that are unexplainable, that there is a possibility. I know, and you've done this to me before.
I just want you to change the word. Unexplained, not unexplainable.
Oh, unexplained. Sorry, unexplained.
Unexplainable presupposes that there will never be an explanation.
It will never be an explanation, yeah. So, I mean, I do believe that, even the word aliens I find to be really strange, but I do believe that other life forms do exist. I think it would be just really short-sighted to say that we are the only life form that exists in the universe, because as we said, the universe is infinitesimal. Like, how could we possibly know? Like, the way that time works, the way that we could never know.
I don't want to be a dick, but you use the word infinitesimal, which means extremely small. I think you meant to
not
say.
Infinitesimal, sorry. I have a toddler. I'm tired, guys. What is the word I'm looking for? The infinite. That was it. Just infinite.
Well, we don't know whether or not it's infinite.
We don't know whether or not it's infinite or not. That's true. But it's
here. Let's put it in terms that's more your speed. Real big.
It's real big, guys. It's real big, like a pair of silicon boobs. Real big.
Do you think they're all bisexual on Titania? I bet they are.
They have naked pillow fights every single night. So yeah, I guess just to boil it down, I do believe that other life forms exist. Could they have possibly visited Earth at one point in time? There's a lot of weird shit that happens on Earth that, like Area 51 and like all that, stuff. I suppose someone could have visited, something could have happened. Do I think that governments spin tales and implant stuff into our consciousness, not in like a weird, like microchip kind of way, but just through media and things like that? Yeah, I do as well. I feel like it is, as you said, it's unexplained. Or silicon implant kind of way. I do feel like it is unexplained as to this point. I don't discount it. As far as Betty and Barney's experience, I think the thing that makes the most sense for me is like a lucid dream. And as you said, I would hate to think they were lying for the sake of lying. And I guess that's kind of like, I just want to have more faith in them as people. I would hate to think that they were just like, hey, let's tell this story, get rich and famous, and people will like us more kind of thing. I would like to think that it really was something that they believed was real, but it was just one of those things that got out of control. The more and more they told it, the more and more it was embellished, the more people took interest in it, the more they felt pressure to kind of have had this experience. I just think it got out of hand.
Well, I adhere to, as a lifelong X-Files fan, I adhere to the Fox Mulder school of thought on this, which is I need hard evidence. I want to seek the truth. I believe the truth is out there, and I can't yet, but I want to believe.
I'm Layla Lawrence.
And I'm Dan Lauer.
And this has been Possibly Not.
Live from Titania.
Hey! Oh my God, wouldn't it be great just to do a live show from Titania?
Live from Titania.
What am I talking about? Why are we No, I'm stopping this recording.